Hello everyone and welcome back to another Star Wars Galaxy Heroes video, to my first ever tier list. In today's tier list I'm going to cover all 5 factions and the units within those factions for the new Krayt Dragon Raid, and how I would prioritise farm certain units and others to help improve your raid score overall. So if you enjoy the video and would like to see me do more of these tier lists, hit that like button down below and obviously let me know down in the comment section what you would like to see me cover next. But anyway, let's just jump straight into it. Just to mention quickly, as you can see from my rankings, they are from Kyber to Carbonite, with Kyber ranking obviously being the best. Within these rankings, I've considered the use of each character mainly in the raid, but I've also considered other game modes like Grand Arena, Territory Wars, and TB as to where they are being ranked. So first off, I would like to talk about 4 characters, which I think most of you will know is the best team for the raid, which is of course Jabba, Boushh, Boba Fett, and Chrysanthemum. This team absolutely bosses the raid as a 4-man and can easily score the 2.7 maximum score on the R8 tier if you do have Boushh, Omicron, and it's even possible without the Omicron, but that just makes things a lot easier if you do have that. Bearing in mind, for the 130 million guild crate, you need an average player score of 2.6 million, which as you would see is easily done with just the 4 characters at R8, because that is 100k more than what you would need. If you didn't want to make such an investment, you can actually get the 1.8 million average needed for the 90 million guild crate, which is still very good rewards and gives you the tier 3 tokens you need for running this team on the Relic 7 tier. As you can see, I've placed these 4 in Kyber tiers. They dominate all PvP and other PvE game modes. Basically, if you don't have Jabba, I would highly recommend working towards him, as his team is useful absolutely everywhere. If you don't have the Boushh Omicron or aren't confident with your mods or how this team works, you can easily plug in Skiffguard Lando, who I've placed in the Erodium tier. The only reason he is in this tier rather than Kyber is because he isn't 100% required for the Jabba team to actually work. But obviously works very well with Jabba if you do need him. But I would definitely prioritize the 4 in the Kyber tier first. And now I would have what we call the leftovers, with Embo following in Chromium, Greedo in Bronzium, and Mob Enforcer, Gamguard, and Cad in Carbonite. I've listed them this way as with the right modding and setup with both Greedo and Embo lead, you can actually do some decent work in the raid if you don't happen to quite have Jabba yet. The only unfortunate thing about Embo lead is that you're actually going to need a Zeta in order to actually maximize the damage output with that, so Greedo could actually be preferred in that case if you're pretty short on Zeta mats. There's a lot of good information as well on the raid Discord server, so if you'd like to look at that and have a look at all what everyone else is suggesting, I'll leave a link to that down in the description down below. The main reason why I've put Embo above Greedo is that Embo actually has a use outside of the raid with Jabba and Bounty Hunters, whereas Greedo is just constantly warming up the bench most of the time. Don't need to speak too much about Mob Enforcer, she just really isn't great for this raid at all. Unfortunately, her kit is not that viable here. Gamguard is an okay tank for a B team for Hutt Cartel, but not really worth taking up the relics as much as you probably would for the others, because he doesn't have much of a use outside of the raid, so unless you have his TB Omicron applied, which I know there's quite a few people that actually do have that. And then Cad, I do feel might have been a bit harsh in his ranking because his kit isn't actually that bad for the raid and actually move Defiant stacks. But unfortunately, outside of that, he really doesn't offer a whole lot because he doesn't really do any damage, unfortunately. Next up, we have Mandalorians to talk about. Unfortunately for us, the BAM cheese got fixed, which we're expecting, as we know CG doesn't like infinite loops. Luckily, it was just a bug with the raid and not a team change that was needed, so none of the characters got nerfed, which is a massive relief. But it did mean that Maul became the best lead for the team in order to actually score maximum damage. The only thing to mention about this is that the best relic level to actually have them at is going to be at relic 7, because at that tier and above, the Mandalorians will deal 20% more damage, and the damage inflicted on them is decreased by 30%, which is a huge difference in score in terms of like actually being able to survive for longer and obviously inflicting more damage. So even though you are going to be taking up higher relics, it just make life a lot easier if you are able to actually work towards that level. Obviously, with a really high relic level, it's really important to make sure you have the right team built. So with Maul lead, you're also going to be wanting BAM, Armorer, Canderous, and a Bo-Katan, also at relic 7, in order to make things the easiest for yourself. It's also important to note you can actually use any of the other Mandalorian leads, like BAM, for example, if you don't happen to have Maul. Obviously, just don't expect like the best results or really particularly great results. Obviously, without him, he is kind of an essential part to doing a lot of damage here. As you can see, though, I have placed Bo in the Erodium tier, and that's only because outside of this raid, she really doesn't have a tremendous amount of use outside. She's mostly just filler for a lot of teams, so that's why I put in Erodium. Obviously, she's still very good, but not great elsewhere, to be honest. And Cadorus is both blue and red because, unlike the others, he is actually usable in both Mandalorian and Old Republic faction, which is quite unusual for a raid like this because he is the only one that this applies to. So he has a great amount of flexibility if you do happen to have Old Republic geared up but don't have Mandalorians, so you can use it that way and vice versa. Next up to cover, we have the 2 bounty hunter Mandalorians who have dropped out of favor significantly, which is OG Mando and Django, who are both placed in the Chromium tier. While they're still very good characters, hence the ranking for a leftover bounty hunter team, they just unfortunately don't fit into the main Maul team, but do have a good use elsewhere in PvP and PvE game modes. Sabine is next in the Bronzium tier, as the kit isn't actually that bad for the raid, as she has an armor shred on her first special and a multi-hitting basic, which is really good for knocking down bomb stacks. So if you do have her at decent relics, you could probably slot her into a Maul team to replace someone like Bam. But if you don't have her geared, I wouldn't worry too much about gearing her up over the others for this raid. Last but not least for this faction is Gar Saxon Imperial Super Commando. I wouldn't go anywhere near these two with the barge pole for this raid or anything else for that matter. The only time I'd actually give them any gear if you have loads of it available and want to take them to gear 12, for example, for their ship. That's pretty much all I would do in terms of working on these two, because they're just useless, basically. The third faction I'm going to talk about as a whole is Tuskens. This team is actually a really great team for the raid, and are probably more early game friendly than Mandalorians are. So I probably recommend using this team over Mandalorians if you are early to mid game, which I imagine a lot of you probably are. They do have a very good use in Grand Arena and Territory Wars, as well as other game modes in the game, like in the current Conquest, for example. I do feel like they are going to be the new CG's new Inquisitors, so I'm going to call them, where they're just going to get a lot of attention and galactic challenges and things. So definitely a good team to be working on, and definitely worth it being in the Erodium tier, as they can improve your guild scores for more increase in your guild or personal rewards. The fourth faction I would like to talk about is Old Republic. I unfortunately think this team relies on a lot of RNG to actually get a good run, so hence why I've put them lower down the list than the others, because you are relying on a bit of RNG. So it is the unreliability of the team that I do not like, which is why I've ranked these characters so low. Don't get me wrong, they actually are pretty good, so they still do a decent score. At Relic 5, you can do 900k to 1.2 million damage, depending on how your run goes, and obviously how your modding is, everything like that. But they aren't as good as the first 3 factions I've talked about, unfortunately. You do have a choice of leads, though, with being able to choose between Jedi Revan and Karth. But I prefer to use Jedi Revan because I find that his team that I would like to use him with just works better, unfortunately, for Karth's sake. And elsewhere in the game, Jedi Revan obviously performs very well in PvP and other PvE game modes. So I've ranked Karth in Bronzium. He probably could have gone into Carbonite, but I do have a bit of a soft spot for Karth. But he's not really worth working out for this raid, really, at the moment at least. I haven't really seen a whole lot being done with Karth lead. The same applies to both Mission and Zalbar, both in the Bronzium League as well. While they may start to have actually a use outside of the raid with Tarful, for example, in PvP, they really aren't really worth the gear for this raid over the team that I'm going to suggest right now. But before we do that, you can actually use Mission and Zalbar under either Karth or Jedi Revan lead. So there is that flexibility there, but I do prefer using Juhani and Sortie as the 4th and 5th, because they do have very good synergy and kits for the Jedi Revan lead, which I prefer to use. Juhani is another Jedi, so synergizes well with the other Jedi in that team, and she has another Master Spell to support Jedi Revan's Master Spell, so you have 2 available if you need them. Obviously, the Dragon applies a lot of debuffs with its spit. She's also a tank as well, so it can tank a lot of damage for your team. And then Sortie is really great here because her AoE hits multiple times, so it can really knock down those bomb stacks. And she has that VIP treatment, which is really good for keeping Jedi Revan alive, who is normally the weakest and also happens to do most of the damage in that team. Sortie outside of the raid is really good as well with her own droid team, obviously led by herself. So definitely worth the gear if you do happen to have droids that do need a home. If you don't want to work on Salty though and have the other 4, you can actually use Canderous as a good 5th here if you really wanted to, but that will harm your damage output with Mandalorians if you have them as well. The other 2 in this team, of course, are Bastila and Jolie. Bastila is great for removing stacks of Defiance on both her basic and second special, and she really helps with the damage output with her buffs that she can pass over to Jedi Knight Revan. But obviously just make sure to use that after the dragon has spat on you, because if you use it beforehand, you'll probably only get them for like 1 turn, because the dragon will just spit on you and remove all your buffs, which you don't really want to happen, because you need to be doing the most amount of damage as you can all the time, basically. Jolie is good in particular for this raid because there are 4 Jedi in the team, so if any of the others die at any point, obviously apart from Salty, you can just revive them and he can help prolong the fight, call people into assist, just generally be quite a nuisance for the dragon in order to actually kill your team. Then last but not least, in this faction, we're going to talk about Porty 3, who is in Carbonite, as he really doesn't offer anything to any team, so it's bench for this raid, unfortunately. So now to address the elephant in the room, we have the 5th faction we need to talk about, and as you can probably see from the massive gap at the bottom of the screen, it is the Jawa faction. Unfortunately, these guys really struggle in the higher tiers because they can't really remove Defiant stacks very well, so they just get eaten and destroyed very quickly. And obviously, you just keep the bombs on them to just increase your damage output. It's pretty funny seeing my Jawa hit for like 300k. But unfortunately, for them to actually do some more work in the raid, they are going to need a rework of some sort, I think, because their kits are very outdated. Like their stuns that they can actually remove the Defiant stacks with only have a percentage chance to actually land. Then you have to hit the potency check after that to actually see whether you can remove the Defiant stack. So really annoying. So they do actually require a rework to increase their raid and overall viability, which I would really like to see. But unfortunately, it just means their overall viability and raid viability just isn't great, and they aren't worth working on at all. So hence why they are in the Carbonite tier. I don't think it's likely we're going to see reworks for Jawas anytime soon, but I would be really surprised if we do. But fingers crossed, Jawas will have their time to shine one day. So overall, Jabba is definitely the way to go, and what I would recommend, obviously depending on your account age, and then either going to Mandos or Tuskens. Old Republic are okay, but are definitely not worth pushing to the higher relic tiers. They'll do it at the relic 5 tier or below. And then poor old Jawas just really need some help in order to actually increase their viability to actually make relicking them worth it. This is going to be the end of the video. I do hope you enjoyed it if you've made it this far and it has helped a little bit. Obviously, if it has, a long comment, like I mentioned, is always much appreciated. Let me know down in the comment section what you would like to see me do a tier list on next. But anyway, thank you for watching, and I shall catch you in the next one.